Two things you have to know. You probably get the same, but I probably get 5 to 10 emails a day from open access journals right, okay. The other thing you have to know from people who aren't in England, that Wordsworth is a very famous poet, and he wrote, his famous line was, "I wandered lonely as a cloud," and he would talk about wandering around, a big famous romantic poet. So I got this email, I'm like, I'm trying to get my slides ready, and and then of course the email comes through and it says, "Dear Dr. Andrew J. Vickers, greetings for the day. Recently we've been through your online published articles. We felt that you conveyed the concepts more clearly to the readers and easily navigate the relevant information. We appreciate all your efforts for the growth of scientific research." I hope you're going to say that to me at the end. "Please, we strongly encourage you to publish your next manuscript in integrative molecular medicine. We welcome you to submit the articles in IMM." So, great journal, it's all misspelt and bad grammar. So I said, "Excellent. How about a piece on Wordsworth?" Because I'm like really trying to get my thing together. And it was annoying me. So they go, "Dear Dr. Vickers, thank you for your prompt response." Trying to do my slides. Anyway, "I would be grateful if you could kindly let me know your complete title of the article. I trust I shall hear from you soon. And have a wonderful day ahead!" Professor Ivan Gout and Dr. Ricardo H. Alvarez, editor-in-chief. So, clearly these two eminent professors are hovering over their keyboards. So I send back this title, "Wordsworth, Bucolic Imagery and the Mystic Urge." "Dear Dr. Vickers, many thanks for your prompt response. I'm afraid it would not be appropriate for our journal. However, your article would be suitable for Global Imaging Insights. Kindly send your article, we will forward it to that journal." Anyway, that certainly amused me while I was, panicking to get my slides finalized. Yeah, certainly. So what was really interesting about how was the prior? Well, the two talks match up, is there's been a lot of interest in using the electronic health record for research, randomized trials, and so on and so forth. And I've always been a little bit suspicious, knowing a lot about electronic medical records, that we've got the electronic medical record, great, let's do a randomized trial, because I think you actually have to bring those records up to research grade first. So with the team at Memorial Sloan Kettering, we spent a long time trying to upgrade the electronic medical records to research grade, particularly looking at patient-reported outcomes. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is routine care, because my overall view is if you make routine care better, then the research will take care of itself. So why should you take patient-reported outcomes as part of routine care? How do we do it at my hospital, and what are the impact for TWICs? So let's start off with why do it. Now, because I'm at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and anyone in a cancer center will tell you that no diseases exist outside cancer. So all my examples pretty much are cancer. So these are patients undergoing chemotherapy. And this was a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Ethan Bash, who was really the pioneer of this field and was a colleague of mine. And what you have on the x-axis is cumulative incidence curves. Over time, did patients report fatigue, nausea, and diarrhea? And what you have here is what the patients reported in orange over time. And then they went back and looked at what the doctors were reporting in the clinical records. And you can see for something like, appetite loss, by 1 year, about 25% of patients were reporting appetite loss. And then you sort of go through the doctor's records and you find that they were reporting that for only 5%. So there's gross underreporting of chemotherapy toxicities in the doctor's routine notes compared to what you get when you just go and ask a patient, do you have fatigue, do you have nausea, and so on. Now, I'm interested in prostate cancer, that's what I do, and it's a slight complement to the work on chemotherapy, because we're looking at radiotherapy and surgery, which are given sort of once in a brief interval, and then you have these side effects that last for a very long period of time. And you see exactly the same thing. So one of the most common problems with prostate cancer treatment is impotence. And you can see that 90% of patients are reporting some erectile dysfunction. but that's only recorded in the case notes of 60% of the doctors. And almost everyone's reporting fatigue, long-term fatigue, and the doctors are hardly ever reporting that. Now, if you want to know why that is, you've got to think, why is it that a patient wouldn't want to tell you about something like diarrhea or libido problems? This is the standard question on the International Index of Erectile Function 6. That you are, it's a standard questionnaire, and it's been a proven psychometric validity. And patients, may not feel comfortable answering that question, especially if their wife is in the room. Anyway, so this idea that you should be asking patients directly, and preferably electronically, because patients will tell a computer anything. This is. I don't know if you know, Obama announced what he calls the cancer moonshot. He wants to rethink how cancer research is done, throwing a lot of money at the problem. And I think they have 7 recommendations. And the 6th recommendation is accelerate the development of systems for the routine monitoring of patient-reported symptoms as the standard of care for cancer patients. So this is now really getting a critical mass in the US in cancer, is we should be asking the patient and recording them. And one of the reasons why is because it's evidence-based. And, it sounds a sensible idea, but let's look at outcomes. So this was a randomized trial in control. What the intervention was that patients filled out questionnaires on iPads and clicking on emails at home. These are patients with advanced lung cancer, and they were reporting common symptoms of patients with advanced lung cancer. And so a symptom threshold event was something bad, breakthrough pain or advanced breathlessness that involved some major intervention. And you can see the number of events that they were having, I think this is over per month, goes down in the intervention group much faster than in the control group. And that's statistically significant. There's lots of other data showing, fewer better symptoms, fewer emergency room visits in the patients who were reporting their symptoms to the doctors. But this was the real kicker. There was better survival. 6% difference in survival, absolute difference, in those patients. And all they were doing was telling the doctors how, it kind of makes sense if someone's getting very breathless, and instead of saying, well, I'll see you in 3 weeks, they hear that the patient's getting breathless, they can call them up and they can make some kind of intervention straight away. Okay, so that's why we should make it part of routine care. How do we do it at my hospital? Well, there's 2 sort of basic ways we do it. I'm going to show you the more complex way. This is something we sort of developed over the past 5 years. This is an email that we send to the patient 3, 6, 12 months after their radical prostatectomy surgery for prostate cancer. And this is what we say. And I'll just let you read that. Does anyone get what the key thing we're saying here is? What's the key bit? What's the key message here? Sorry? Feeling better, or why fill in the questionnaire? Go on.
I'm going to use it.
Sorry?
I'm going to use it.
I'm going to use it. This is going to help you. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of the scientific discipline of behavioral economics. If you haven't, you should, because it's all about how do you get people to do stuff. And we read a lot of behavioral economics. How do you get people to fill in questionnaires, and how do you get doctors to read the questionnaires? And one of the basic behavioral economic principles is that it's much easier to get people to do stuff if it's in their own best interests than because they're being nice for you. And so this is a lot, a lot of the questionnaires would say, please fill in this anonymous questionnaire to help our research. And you just throw that in the bin. You don't say survey by that. Survey's a terrible word, because it's like, did you enjoy your trip on American Airlines? You just throw it away, right?
Would all
go on.
doctors do it? I mean, it's quite a promise, isn't it? If you send this to 1,000 patients.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll show you how it works, and then I'll go through the whole thing. So they click on the link and they come to a questionnaire, and this is just the standard questionnaire that psychologists have developed for prostate cancer patients. And there's different languages that you can whoops, you can look at. So you just, if you don't speak English, you can just click on a link. There's a little instructional video that says, hi, I'm Brad and I had prostate cancer. I want to tell you about this good tool that I use to help keep in contact with my doctor during treatment. And the other really nice thing about using questionnaires electronically is that they're interactive and they don't ask dumb questions. So prostate cancer is my thing, so you might get bored about talking about prostate cancer and sexual function, but here you go. This is the standard questionnaire used for erectile function is called the IIEF, the International Index of Erectile Function. And the first question is, how often were you able to get an erection during sexual activity? You answer that. The next question is, how often were you able to maintain your erection during sexual activity? And the third one, so on and so forth. And I've actually seen guys, they write no sexual activity. This is on a piece of paper, and the next one they write no sexual activity. And then the third question, they write, okay, don't make me feel bad about it, right? I mean, you're just asking. We've also seen on the paper questionnaires, it's like, how often were you able to get an erection during sexual activity? No sexual activity. How often were you able to maintain your erection? Most times, right? So with the computer, what you can do is you can say, you've just said you're not having any sexual activity. Remember, this doesn't just mean intercourse, it means a variety of different things. If you really have had no sex at all, click the next, otherwise click the previous one. There's all sorts of different interactive things that we use. We also ask about urinary function. This is the standard question you ask about pads. And one of the big problems you have in both clinically and research is that somebody comes to see you at 5 months after surgery, and then you see them again at 10 months, and at 5 months they weren't using the pad, and 10 months they were. When did they stop using the pad? Because you've just got these questionnaires, and the computer will say, the first time they say they're not using pads, it'll go to a question and say, when did you stop using the pads? But if you're still using pads, it already knows that you stopped using pads. It doesn't go to that interactive question. So you can have some of these smart questionnaires. Patients quite like using them. They tend to say, it's nice that someone's paying attention. Now here's the real key thing, is you've got to make the data useful for the doctors, otherwise they won't look at it. So this is the report that we provided, and basically we sat down with the clinicians and we designed the report with them. Don't squint, I'll explain. And we said things like, what is it that you want to know? And they said, the first thing we want to know very quickly is how are they doing? So, what's the key question? And they said, key question for erection is, do they have an erection sufficient for penetration? So that's right. And if not, are they using injections to help? So, right here it says that this patient is not having erection sufficient for penetration, and they're on injections, and even with the injections, they've got trouble. The other thing that they asked us is, we said, what do you need to know? And they said, the patients come back at 6 months and 9 months, and they say, I'm not able to have sex. And they say to us, is that it? Am I never going to have sex again? And I said, what do you say? And the doctors say, it can take time, and this is sort of standard boilerplate. And we can actually make statistical predictions. This particular patient is really having a very poor response. Even in 9 months, we can say that it's very unlikely this guy is going to have recovery of function. And so instead of saying, let's wait 2 years, and we're like, why don't we refer you to sexual medicine clinic now? So it's some sort of actionable intelligence. And in this particular case, you can see that no injections comes up. So we're like, you go to sexual medicine, we could try the injections. Maybe that will help your recovery. And the other thing that is, what's the other question? We in the room with the nurses and the doctors, and they said, the other question that everyone asks is this normal? Right? Is what am I experiencing normal? And again, all of this is from statistical models that are hardwired into the electronic medical record system. And this particular patient had a very good response to urinary function, very good recovery of urinary function, which is kind of what's expected. That's sort of fairly normal. This is an older guy without great baseline function and has not recovered sexual function, and that is completely expected. And so you can say, look, you haven't done well, but that's pretty normal for a guy of your age and your type of cancer. The other thing is, if you just look at that, you can tell why it's useful for the doctor, because normally the patient comes in for their follow-up visit and the doctor says, so, are you able to have sex? Are you able to maintain your erection? And then they say, how about urinary function? Do you ever have to rush to the toilet? Are you using pads? Do you ever drip urine? Yeah, on and on and on. what can this doctor say? He can say, well, it looks like your urinary function's fine, no pads, no rushing, no urgency, no frequency, that's great, but it does look like you've still got a problem with your erectile function. Do you want to talk about that? It's a much more efficient way of using time, it's much more focused, it's much more patient-friendly. We don't always, use these very sophisticated systems. This is just a photocopy of a piece of paper. Before anyone has a prostate, or after they have a prostate biopsy, they just write, just circle, what was your level of pain and discomfort, and how anxious or tense were you during the prostate biopsy procedure. And that's afterwards, then the doctor can look at that and counsel the patient, because often these patients are having biopsies repeatedly on active surveillance, and so this was a patient who had a lot of pain. Let's talk about that next time. Okay, so what's the impact for Twix? Why am I telling you all this? Well, the real concept, this is Martin Luther King, who was a believer in integration between the races, and our concept here is data integration. Right? So what happens in typical practice, and what used to happen at my hospital in prostate cancer for many years, is that you would come in and you would be handed this questionnaire, and it would say, this is a confidential, anonymous questionnaire that's going to help us do our research. Please fill in this long questionnaire. How often have you leaked urine? What best describes your urinary control? How many and you'd fill in this long questionnaire, and you'd hand it to the researcher. You'd say, thank you for helping our research. And then the doctor would come in and say, how are you doing? Are you leaking any urine? Are you having any? I would go through, and so you repeat that, and then at the end of it, you'd get one of these surveys saying, how satisfied or otherwise are you with your care at MSK? And I got a big problem with these because they asked completely the wrong question. Satisfied. There's two problems. I had this very interesting conversation with this friend of mine from the neighborhood who was treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering for a very aggressive lymphoma, and he was telling me how he's I work in this fantastic hospital and it was just the best place ever. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, well, the staff was so empathetic and the environment was so nice. And after a time, I was like, Adam, you know why you should be satisfied at Memorial Sloan Kettering? He said, why? I said, because we're having this conversation right now. Right? In most other places, you'd be dead, but Sloan Kettering saved your life. So often, what this actually means in terms of these satisfaction surveys is highly questionable. But anyway, we've got these three or four different ways of getting data, and they're all in these different silos. They don't speak to each other. And really, the idea is, why don't we just ask once, right? Are you using pads? We can use, if we do that electronically, then we can reuse that data for research. We can use it for our clinical practice. Oh, you're using pads, let's refer you to the urinary voiding specialist or whatever. And also for quality assurance. Are patients satisfied? Well, the satisfaction from the patients should be less like, are you satisfied, yes or no? But like, well, are you actually getting the right results of the surgery, which is that you are potent, continent, and do not have recurrence from cancer. So in terms of research, we can actually use it for randomized trials, experimental research. So this is a classic trial, a classic problem in surgery. So anastomosis during prostate cancer surgery. So the prostate is between the bladder and the penis, and you have to cut out the prostate, you basically have to cut the urethra out, and you have to then sew it back together again. And how exactly you sew that together, people disagree on how to do it. And so to do a trial, if you had a 20% rate of incontinence in one group and a 16% in another group, that would be really important to know, but you would need a massive randomized trial. And no one is we worked out to do that trial would be $5 to $8 million, and no one's going to say, oh, let's spend $5 to $8 million saying whether you should do in 4 stitches or 3 stitches, or it should be a running suture or an interrupted suture. So that trial was never done. So we actually tried doing this by integrating it into practice. We cluster randomized the surgeons. Every 3 months, basically, I give them a call and say, use the running suture, and then use the interrupted suture. And then the endpoint of this trial was the urinary continence that was reported by the patients in routine care. Now, this was actually part of a factorial trial where it was node removal as well, different templates for the node removal, and because we asked patients whether they recur or not. And we have 1,400 patients randomized on that trial. We have no funding for that trial, by the way, whatsoever. It's just done because the only cost is for the research assistant to get consent, which is a sort of 10-minute process. We got about 800 patients on this trial, and then we had to stop for one of these reasons that is always out of the control of clinical trialists, which is that they changed the surgical technique, so this step became completely, no one ever got to this step again. But it did demonstrate the principle that you can do very, very large trials using patient-reported outcomes. This is a trial that's currently underway. This is, by the way, the first picture of a patient that's been shown today, but this is a radical prostatectomy, and it's done with minimally invasively, and so they make little holes and they put tools into the body cavity. And then when you take these tools out, you have this little hole that you have to sew up. And there's actually this controversy about whether you do it vertically or horizontally. Now, can you imagine us writing to the NIH and saying, can we have $8 million to find out whether you should sew this up? I mean, it's never going to happen, right? Well, we actually, on our questionnaire, we say, how's your urinary function, how's your sexual function? We actually say, have you any swellings or hernia? And so that's actually a patient-reported outcome. If they do, they're called in, obviously, and then that gets into the electronic medical record. So patients are being randomized on a cluster, the surgeons are being randomized, cluster crossover, to sew up the vertically or transverse suturing of the port site, and we're comparing the outcomes. So this is a prostate biopsy. It's really awful for a patient, actually. We have to, you put a probe into their backside and you fire needles through the rectum into the prostate to take samples of the prostate. And as I showed you back here, we're actually asking patients, just part of routine care, how much pain they're in and so on and so forth. And so what we're doing is, this trial has not started yet, but we're going to ask them if they, it's not a trial within a cohort, but it's a similar idea, because we're only going to just do this one. A patient who turns up, we're going to say, look, we're going to do this biopsy. We may offer you a new procedure, and that procedure is going to be kind of a tape with relaxation and music and coping strategies on it, and they're going to be randomized to that. And this is just an example of how you can use that for observational research. This is, just a bit of background. Outcomes after surgery for prostate cancer is, it's a very sort of difficult area. And so the NIH did this very, very large trial called the observational study called the Prostate Cancer Outcomes Study. And there were about 800 patients on it. It went on for years, and it was millions of dollars. I think there were like 8 different grants to support it. And I was looking at the data, fantastic study, and I realized there was very little data on what happened at year 2, 3, and 4. So I spoke to my, I spoke to the database manager, and I said, oh, how many patients do we have? And he said, oh, 3,000. Wow. And we just actually reported this paper that shows that patients, and this completely unexpected finding, is that patients carry on recovering for many years, when that was very unexpected. Do you want to press the button, because it's my last slide? There you go. Well, she said 1 minute, so it's perfect. Here we go. So, all right. So, what are my conclusions? So, if you integrate patient-reported outcomes as a routine part of care, and put all your effort on optimizing clinical care. Don't think about research. Don't think about quality assurance. That will look after itself. If you make things better for the patient and you make things better for the clinician, right, they'll want to carry on filling in this data. And a key thing is think about how you're reporting it back to the doctor. And sometimes we do this in a variety of different areas in the hospital. We're trying to expand it, but we're doing one with the geriatric clinics. And at one point, we were going to switch the software over, and the doctors were saying, well, wait a minute, we won't get our reports for a week. I mean, they were really worried about not getting the reports back. So, you're incentivizing them to give you data. And then once you have those data, once you've made everybody's clinical care better, patient care better, you can use those data for both observational research, but in experimental research, such as in Twix. Thank you very much.
This is a general question. I was part of a clinic that was really trying to do this for psychiatrists. And one of the big issues is, how do you decide which outcomes that you're going to incorporate, how much? is there the process? Is there a commit? Because what you're saying is, I absolutely agree with patient-centered, outcomes related, patient care only. But you know, if researchers come into the room when you're discussing what to add, they'll want to add all sorts of other questions. So how did you guys do that? I'm just curious.
Tell researchers to go take a flying jump. No, it's not far off of that. We're saying that, you know, somebody else said it before about what is there that a researcher wants to know that a clinician doesn't, right? If there's something the researcher wants to know the clinician doesn't, then why is that a good endpoint? If the clinician doesn't care about, why are we going to use that as an endpoint in a clinical trial? So, you know, often and I'll give you a very specific example of this, is that, and it's in prostate cancer, a lot of people wanted us to add bowel function. You can get bowel toxicity from radiotherapy, but not from surgery. And they said, well, ask about bowel function, because then we can compare the radiotherapy with the surgery. I'm like, you don't have to. There's no you already got the comparison, because you know there's no bowel toxicity from the surgery. Right? So that's an example where you actually have to fight back against the researchers and say that the average surgeon doesn't need to know what the patient's bowel function is. But how we do it at MSK is, for a while, it was just basically, you know, the group that actually would sit down with the clinicians to choose the questionnaires. They were just basically a good group, and they got it. You know, they knew that they had to be short. You couldn't have 50 questions on a questionnaire, and it was very much focused on the doctor. What we would say to the doctor is, imagine you're outside the room and the patient's in the room, and a nurse is going to hand you a piece of paper with some information on it. What would you like on that piece of paper? What do you want to know about? And most of the doctors could tell you pretty quickly what they wanted to know about and what they didn't want to know about. And then we'd go and find some questionnaires that dealt with those and find some questions. The advantage of cancer is it's very stereotyped, right? You know, if somebody has prostate cancer and they have a radical prostatectomy, you know what the endpoints are. If they have radiotherapy, you know what they are. Then some other conditions, like you're mentioning, like it's general psychiatric, the way they actually do it is that they ask the patient, tell me about the symptom you want, you know, tell me about a symptom that you have as a problem, type it in here, and then give me a score from 0 to 10 on it. So you can actually do it more general, or choose from this list. Here are 20 things, choose the top 3 that worry you, and then the right questions will pop up. Okay.